The famous Israeli cantor and performer Dudu Fisher made a noteworthy remark during the recent virtual gala hosted by the Central Chabad branch in New Jersey, the Rabbinical College of America. He said many people have been saying that the world started to change a great deal over the last 10 months. But in reality, the world started to change long before that, when the Lubavitcher Rebbe began sending his shluchim, his emissaries, throughout the world. But what was the Rebbe's motivation in sending out emissaries? And what relevance does it have to me and you? Exactly 70 years ago, on the 10th of Shabbat, just 1 year after the previous Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law's passing, Hasidim were anxious. The Rebbe had not yet been willing to accept the leadership as they had hoped and requested. Being the first yahrzeit of his Rebbe and father-in-law, the Rebbe spent many hours that day at his resting place, and after he returned from the cemetery, he went for his daily visit to his mother at her apartment. Finally, late that evening, the Rebbe joined the Farbrengen at Chabad World Headquarters at 770 Eastern Parkway and began to share words of inspiration. But the Hasidim wanted something more. They desperately wanted the Rebbe to recite a mimer, a Hasidic discourse, with a special melody, which would indicate that the Rebbe had indeed accepted the leadership. About an hour into the Farbrengen, an elderly Chassid by the name of Rabbi Nemtsov stood up and announced, "Everyone wants to hear a mimer, a Hasidic discourse. The sichas, the talks, are good and fine, but we want to hear a Hasidic insight." The shul was totally silent. Everyone was anxious to see how the Rebbe would respond. And so it was. The Rebbe began to recite the first paragraphs of the last Hasidic discourse that the previous Rebbe had asked to be published for the 10th of Shvat, the year earlier in 1950, which turned out to be the day he passed away. The Rebbe then began to speak in the tune of a mimer. In their excitement, everyone began pushing. And then, when things calmed down, the Rebbe continued and spoke about the mission of our generation, which he called the last generation of exile and the first generation of redemption. The Rebbe spoke about the self-sacrifice that our forefather Abraham made to bring godliness down into this world, and how ultimately Moses, who was the 7th generation from Abraham, was the one who succeeded in actually bringing the divine presence into this world through the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle. Since our generation is the 7th generation in the Chabad dynasty, the Rebbe said that it is our mission to bring the divine presence back once again into this world with the coming of Mashiach. While the Rebbe spoke about our work as the 7th generation, the Rebbe cried a lot.
Die Hanhoge, was der Rischen hat uns bewiesen, und was hat uns bewiesen, der Rebbe, ist, dass das man sich von dem jeden, was gefühlt sich in dem Deschwi, als Chosch, fühlten sich nicht keine Kirche und fühlten sich nicht keine Unionen und schreit mir an die Humani und hat Reis auf den Ruf. Sagt mir, wie bald, dass du bist Lebi Pchirosa. Bist du der Schwie von dem und dem, die Schaß, was schon nicht getroffen die Welt. Ich darf jeder von uns nehmen auf sich, hat dem in Havede, und hat ihm gegeben Kirchis auf den Ruf, warum sich in der Schwie, als darf in sich wissen, dass sein Schwie ist, wie viel Mord für ihn ist gegossen. Und außerdem wird können nehmen, einteilen und aufteilen sein Heilig in der Minion von Mamschich sein, dem Schien oder Mato, dem Hase Hagashmi, Vachumri.
And then the Rebbe said, "We will now take a break and say L'chaim." At that point, Rabbi Nemtsov was so excited that he jumped onto the table and cried out, "We must say the blessing of Shehecheyanu," recited over a joyous occasion. God has helped us. We have a Rebbe. The Rebbe smiled, and when he continued the discourse, he emphasized how we must follow the example of the previous Rebbes, who cared for both the physical and spiritual welfare of others, regardless of who they were or of their spiritual status. During this historical Farbrengen, the Rebbe made his mission statement.
Ich sag allemal, a Seder, a deste Sache will hören a Statement. Und das Statement, da darf sein etwas mit a Chidush dover, mit a Inge, was im Mavel es erreihen. Ich bemehle das, ich weiß nicht, das darf Mavel sein es erreihen, aber ich will hören a Statement, hat der Rebbe gesagt, dass da drei Sachen. Als da Avas ist Hashem, und so da Avas Ater, und so da Avas Yisroel. Und hat die alle drei Sachen sein in Kule Chad. Das ist, man kann nicht voneinander teilen. Zwischen einer haben wir der Zweite. Und man handelt, wie bald das ist Kule Chad, und das ist auch Kule Chad, wie ein Netz ist eins. Das ist, aber ist demut, ist dort der Klall, als ein Ingen Atzmi. Wenn man halt so schon an ein Teil davon ist, hat demut, hat der Tefis Kule, als bringt auf Chassidus B'Shem Baal Shem Tov bringt es auf B'Shem Rishonim. Also etzem kishat Tefis b'Miksosse hat Tefis b'Kule. Und wie bald als hat die alle drei Sachen seinen Kule Chad, ist in was für Achilek mit Ton chappen, darf man wissen sein, am Chapton alle drei Sachen. Bemeile darfen alle wissen, aber schaß man chapt so schon Onavas Hashem, ist das nicht eine Sache, was man kann damit jetzt sein, und man kann sich damit halten, eben mit Nitob Mavas Atere und eben mit Nitob Mavas Yisroel.
And so, to accomplish this important responsibility of making the coming of Mashiach a reality in this world, the Rebbe sent shluchim, emissaries around the world, as the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs remarked numerous times, that a good leader creates followers, a great leader creates leaders. So yes, it is wonderful to see that today there are more than 5,000 couples serving with love and often self-sacrifice as the Rebbe's emissaries around the world, doing their part to change the world for the better. But what the Rebbe ultimately wanted was that you too become his emissary by doing your part in helping to strengthen Yiddishkeit through love and devotion, so that together you and I can complete the mission of our generation and bring the world to a redemptive state, when the world will be filled with godliness and goodness. May we merit to see this moment, as the Rebbe often said, B'mehera v'yameinu mamash, speedily in our days. Shabbat Shalom.